Yeah, I'm Aaron Saigo. I'm a KDE core developer. We've actually got a few of us here. There's even another one in the back there hanging out, Zach. I work on a variety of things in KDE. Primarily my focus these days is on the workspace, the actual desktop and panels in KDE, although I've touched a lot of different aspects of KDE here and there with a focus on usability and general user interface issues. So they asked me to talk about Qt and where we're going with KDE, focusing on, of course, with Qt 4 now being out, and how that's affecting our direction within KDE, how it's enabling us to do things, or what kind of challenges we've been facing. So I thought we'd start by taking a look at where we're at today. We just started the KDE 4 process, and when I say just, I mean just. We recently had a meeting in Spain. We have our yearly academy, which is our world conference every year. This year was in Spain, and that was really when we sat down and started talking about a lot of, well, what do we want to do with KDE 4? What's our directional goals? Where are we trying to end up? And how long is it going to take us to get there? And that was at the end of August. So we've only had like 2 months since then. Some of us started a bit earlier working with Qt 4 and KDE, but not by much. So a lot of what I'm going to cover is really forward-looking. I kind of joked I should have brought my crystal ball to look in and see what it's going to look like in a year. But a lot of this is very forward-looking, and it's going to give you an idea of what we're thinking about at this point, and what we've actually encountered in our initial days of porting and using Qt 4, and what we're looking forward to. So everything that I cover today, a year from now, it may look completely different. It may be something completely different. But this is where we're at today and what our plans are. So we started with a KDE 3 code base. We're not starting from scratch. We are revisiting a lot of our technologies, but we have started using the KDE 3 code base. Just actually to get an idea from the audience here, how many people use Linux on the desktop? Wow, this is so. When I gave this presentation in San Jose, which is the developer days, where the developer days were held in the United States, I asked that same question. Like 4 people put their hand up, and it's like, wow, okay. And then how many people use it, as a primary desktop? And like only 1 hand went up, and it was, yeah. This is a much nicer audience. How many people use KDE on their desktop? Wow, brilliant. How many use it as their primary or desktop of choice? Wow, that's amazing. Beautiful. It's being from someone from North America. I'm from Canada, so being in North America, it's a very different kind of environment there. So I don't have to go and explain what KDE is so much. With KDE 3, we had very large libraries, basically monolithic libraries. And one of the reasons for this is because Qt was a monolithic library. Everything was in one big library, right? The non-GUI classes as well as the GUI classes, all the image processing. There were some breakout modules, some plugins, but all the core functionality was shoved into that one big libqt. So we kind of followed suit and made these big monolithic libraries. In fact, we didn't really think about it too much until, as time went on, we started thinking, well, man, it'd be really nice if we could write applications with the Qt technology and with KDE technology that didn't require the X server around. Or it'd be really nice to create lightweight processes that did just a few basic things and only needed certain functionality. But when we were actually creating KDE 2 and 3, that wasn't really something that was first and foremost in our mind. And even if it was, we were still held back by the design of Qt itself. So we have some very large monolithic libraries, libkde core, libkde UI, libkio, libkfile, etc. And there's a lot of cross dependencies between these things. We've got a number of what we think are attractive interfaces, and our users tend to like them. But we've run into a lot of limitations when it comes to the state-of-the-art on the X11 platform, in particular the open source implementations, X-Free86 and more recently X.org. And because there was some blocking issues there technologically, Qt as well had some limitations as far as what we could do. And we're going to be covering what some of those are and how with Qt 4 we're actually looking to move beyond those issues. In KDE3, we have a lot of features. One of our developers recently ran SLOC account over our code base, and it turns out we have a little over 4 million lines of code in our Subversion repository right now. It's amazing we get as much done in so little code. As someone pointed out, OpenOffice has a little over twice as many lines of code, and they just provide an Office suite. We provide an entire desktop environment from web browsing, file management, groupware, image processing, and an Office suite in a little over 4 million lines of code. Still, that's a non-trivial amount of work. The vast, overwhelming majority of that is in C++ and uses Qt. So we do have a lot of features, and we have a lot of applications. And this is just the KDE project. I'm not even thinking about all the third-party applications that you can get out there, either on kdeapps.org, or I met several of you here at the conference who are writing KDE applications for use within your companies, which is great. But just within the KDE project, we've got a lot of features. Some would say we have too many features. Sometimes we've exposed all those features all at once, and sometimes in a way that doesn't really show a lot of forethought. So that was also one of the things that we identified as kind of where we're starting from. Lots of features, that's great. Allows people to do a lot of great things. But how do we actually expose them? How do we provide that functionality to the end user? So one of the first things that we decided to revisit with KDE 4 was how we're structuring our libraries. And we looked at Qt and what Trolltech has done with Qt when you compare Qt 3 to Qt 4. And one of the things they spent a lot of time on was API clarity. Has anybody read the articles by Matthias Ettrich on designing APIs with C++? If you haven't, you design APIs in C++, definitely read these. They're just, and not even if it's in C++, if you use any object-oriented language, it's a really good set of articles on how to define and design clear, consistent APIs that people like using, as opposed to people use and curse under their breath while they're doing so. With Qt 4, they actually revisited, in some cases, on a class-by-class basis. And they define the API and then send it off to a person in Trolltech, and they actually have to sign off on, yeah, that's a consistent design, the API makes sense. And that really helps. People that are now working with Qt 4, including us, we've noticed that, wow, even over Qt 3, the API is clearer, it's more consistent, the naming is more predictable, and Qt 3 is already pretty good at that. Qt 4 is also modular, so you can link against just the non-GUI classes, allowing one to write applications that get to use things like QString and whatnot without having to have an X server around. Again, I'm focused pretty much on developing on Linux in this talk. So I'm going to assume that there's an X server around. So we looked at those two trends when it came to our libraries. And we decided these would be good goals as well for KDE. Because if someone's writing a KDE application, they're starting with the foundation of Qt. And if we can extend Qt in a consistent manner, then it feels like a more natural and coherent and cohesive environment for people to work in. So we set some goals for ourselves. One is naming and API consistency. And that's just a matter of discipline and being a bit more rigorous when someone comes up with a new library or a new set of classes to actually go and go, okay, does this API make sense? This is also aided and embedded by the fact that we're moving towards unit testing, rigorous unit testing, such that all of our classes within KDE, all the base classes within KDE Core, and hopefully KDE UI will be unit tested in KDE 4. We've also moved to greater modularization. And we've looked at it and gone, okay, what are the relationships between our different libraries and our different classes within KDE? And one of the things that we identified was we've got a lot of really great classes that are utility classes. Things that you could use in any application, whether they're a KDE application or not, that makes sense. A Qt analogy, an analog in Qt would be, say, QString. It doesn't really matter whether you're making a Qt app or not. It's really nice to have a good string class if you're writing in C++. And in my opinion, QString is one of the best ones out there. So that's kind of like a utility class. Then we've got these frameworks. We've got things such as kconfig.xt, which allows you to use XML to describe the defaults and the ranges and the settings and what those configuration settings actually do. We've got things like XML GUI, which allows you to define your action-based interface elements, your menu bars, your toolbars, your context menus using XML. These are framework things that when you use them in an application, you really go, oh, this is obviously a KDE. The user can start to see these, that it's using these frameworks and identify them as a KDE application. So with KDE 4, we're actually stratifying our libraries into utility classes, components as we call them, and frameworks. And we're actually concentrating as well on bridging out not just to the Linux group, but also making sure that these classes run on OS X and Windows, so that the platform reach of our libraries matches the platform reach, with the exception of embedded, of Qt. This is actually something that took me kind of by surprise. In San Jose, I was talking to people, and virtually everybody there was developing on Windows. And so I didn't really expect a lot of them to have a lot of knowledge and insights to what we were doing in the KDE project, or even have a lot of desire to use what we were using. But I had several people come up to me and go, so how can I use KHTML, which is our web rendering framework, used also by Apple and Nokia? How can we use KHTML in our Windows application? Because we'd really like to use something that's Qt native to render web content with JavaScript automation and whatnot. And this is like perfect, but how do I get it to run on Windows? And of course the answer right now is, well, I don't think there is a native Windows port, but both KDE 4, we're actually working on this. So that the goal is to have the ability to write applications that are KDE applications using the KDE libraries and have them run on Windows or OS X or Linux. I've already heard several people at this conference asking similar questions. How can I use these KDE technologies across the platform? And the reason for this, the reason why we're doing this, is kind of twofold. Number one, we want to help increase the value inherent in the Qt environment. So when someone's developing their applications on the stack of technology, KDE isn't a really interesting project over here that it'd be nice to use, but we can't. But it's actually something you have access to. The other reason is we want to start addressing the application availability issue on Linux. We feel that if people can easily develop applications that are cross-platform, then they no longer have to decide whether they're going to write an application for Windows or an application for Linux. And that's what we find people are doing right now. They're often writing Qt applications as opposed to KDE applications, not using any KDE framework because the primary target might be Windows users. So we're trying to solve the application availability issue, or help solve it, on Linux by providing our technologies as well across these platforms. Oh, by the way, I really hate just talking at people for an hour and a half. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, if you want to get something off your chest, just feel free to raise your hand or shout it out, and don't worry about interrupting me. When it comes to KDE and usability, we've done pretty well, I think. A couple years ago, there was a usability test done of people that were migrating from, I believe it was Windows 98 and 2000 to XP. And they put an XP machine in front of them and a KDE on Linux machine in front of them, and had them do the same 10 or so tasks. And the differential in time that required these people, they'd never used XP before and they'd never even seen KDE before, these people, was minimal. It was something like 34 to 38 minutes to complete the tasks, 34 minutes being on Windows, 38 minutes on Linux. For someone who never used a KDE desktop at all, that was pretty good. So I think we've done fairly well, but it's pretty much universally agreed we could do a lot better. So we're looking right now at, well, what are our usability issues and how can we address them? And how can we address them creatively? One of those issues happens to be what I call the single-click conundrum. Those of you who are familiar with KDE know that we use single-click activation. We don't have the differentiation by default. You can turn it on if you want, but we don't differentiate between single and double-click. So when you're in the file manager, single-click opens. You don't have to double-click on things. This is great for people who suffer from RSI. It's also great for people who are newer to computers or are used to the web metaphor where everything is single-click, right? And that's one of the reasons why no one has to teach people how to use websites, is because there isn't this really complex set of interaction elements. It's, you click on things and things happen. You have to discover when you single-click or double-click. It's interesting, if you actually watch, even mid-level average Office users running that are used to Windows, and they single-click and double-click almost randomly. If you read Jeff Raskin's works on usability, he was the guy who was responsible for the concept of single versus double-click within the Apple world before he got kicked out of that project. But he later on recanted in his book Humane Interface. He actually goes on for a good few pages about how it was a stupid idea because people have to build this very complex mental model of what you single click on and what you double click on and why you do these different actions. And for most people, that's simply not attainable because unlike us, most people don't work on a computer as a profession. It's a tool. It's like a pencil. We're kind of like pencil experts. And so we really get a good mental model of how interfaces work. Most people don't. So we decided in KDE, well, we're going to go to single click. And we've done this for a good number of years, and it's fairly popular. So these are the nice things about single click. It's also quicker. I mean, that's a fairly obvious one click versus 2 clicks. However, single click is bad. The challenge we've come across with single click is how do you just select something? Because in the desktop metaphor, we have 2 different states that something can be in, a selected state and an activated state. Well, in a push button, that's fine. The selected state is when you click in, and it's not until the mouse is released that we actually activate it. With an icon in a file manager, it's a bit trickier. Because on a Windows or a Mac machine, you click once, it selects it, click twice, it activates it. So yeah, how do we deal with the fact that people just want to select files? Well, we've always said, well, just rubber band it. Start clicking off the icon and drag onto the icon. Of course, it's a cop-out. This is something that a lot of people aren't familiar with, aren't used to. It isn't as fast, and a lot of people just, if you watch, especially newer users to KDE, they'll kind of sit there and, well, how do I just select something? Right-click on it, and that's an advanced feature as well. And it still must be learned. If you put someone who's never used a computer in front of such an interface, they have to still learn that you click on things to activate them, which is kind of, for us, it's like an obvious thing, but it's actually something that's learned. I have a young son, and I've actually watched him, as he's grown, get to use a computer, and it's kind of interesting to discover someone who's completely new to computing in interfaces, what they actually have to learn, all the different things they have to take in to learn how an interface works. So we looked at this and went, okay, well, how can we keep single click, because it's superior in a lot of ways, but solve the problem? How can we address it and make it better? Well, something I'm working on right now is the idea of Mouseover based interfaces that are self-exposing. So if this is our file manager, and this is actually an artist mock-up from a few months ago, you can ignore the sidebars. Just look at the icon there. When you mouse over an icon, if it actually presented you an interface on top of that icon that actually told you what it was going to do, such as select, open, or other actions. What's interesting is the interfaces we use today, and this is going to be kind of a repeating meme throughout this discussion, the interfaces we use today are based upon a very old metaphor, over 20 years old now, and that's a desktop. And it was designed when we had very low resolution screens that were about that big. How many people had one of the original Macs, the all compact, all-in-one Macs? One person. I loved my little compact Mac. It was great. But it had like this tiny little screen, right? It was like this big, and it was black and white. And to be honest, the graphics capabilities were pretty primitive compared to what we have today. There was no such thing as 3D first-person shooters back then. So the graphics capabilities were really primitive as well. Today we've got, how many people use something smaller than a 17-inch screen on a daily basis? Yes, smaller than a 17. Yes, so like a 15 or a 14. One person? Yes. Right, what's the resolution on it?
1,400.
Exactly. So it's a smaller screen, but actually has very high resolution. We're seeing both resolutions increase and screen real estate increase. I mean, they're talking about 20-inch laptops now. It's like, I don't know at what point it starts becoming portable, but they're now talking about these. We now have very high resolution screens with a lot of screen real estate and very powerful graphics capabilities. So the idea being that with the Mouseover based interface, and I kind of played with this with the panels in 3.4 and 3.5, where you mouse over an icon and tooltips magically appear. Really big ones that tell you a lot about what you're actually mousing over. And when I did those in 3.4, people, I wasn't sure how people were going to react to it. And I got a lot of really supportive and positive email. And one of the things that came through time and again was people that were deploying this in scenarios like schools or internet cafes where people don't really know that desktop. People were using those and relying on those to quickly discover what was happening. And the Mouseover concept worked really well. And some of the things that I measured was, well, how long does it take, if a person, how can we tell when a person is actually trying to concentrate on an icon versus just trying to zoom past it? And it's about 1/3 of a second. If a person hovers over an icon for about 1/3 of a second, they're either confused or don't know or want to do something with that icon. So so taking that same concept, and people ask for, we want these tooltips everywhere on the panels. We want them in the clock, we want them in the page, we want them in the taskbar, and they are now in 3.5. So using that same general concept with a content or a file manager, so when you actually mouse over an icon and using some more of that screen real estate that we have in fairly good abundance now, and actually presenting a small interface. So we don't lose the single click, first off. And what's nice about it is you don't have to teach people about this because it's obvious. You point at things and it tells you what it can do. And then you just select the things you actually want to do. Now, doing this with Qt 3 would have been kind of a pain in the rear. Why? Well, if you notice, if you use KDE, our rubber banding in Conqueror is pretty graphically primitive. And there's a reason for that. There is a nice patch out there for rubber banding in Conqueror, but it actually requires patches to Qt, which is why very few distributions of Linux that ship KDE provide that really nice rubber banding effect. And instead provide just the very basic one that we ship by default. With Qt 4, we have a much nicer and more powerful painting engine. We have one that supports alpha-blended widgets. We have, Arthur, which opens the door for hardware acceleration in the future as well. So being able to do things such as a fading in, alpha-blended overlay that's actually a widget that's active, doing that, writing that in code is not only, you don't have to do it as hackishly, but it's actually fairly efficient. So when it comes, a lot of people go, well, what does a graphics editor have to do with the usability of a desktop? When we have access to better graphics capabilities and better graphics technology, it allows us to be more creative and a little bit more experimental with what we do in our interfaces. Things that just simply we were hamstrung by the tools we had, we can now reach out a bit more and try things that are more natural to a human being. Now, speaking of more natural to a human being, and I mentioned before that our desktop metaphor that we use today is largely focused around what the original Macintosh brought out in 1984. How many people have heard of the Plasma Project? Oh, good. Heard of. Yes. I don't know what the heck it is, he says. No idea. This is actually what we're going to start talking about a bit. That's kind of my pet project at the moment for KDE 4. The metaphor of the desktop that we use, and this is regardless of whether you use Windows or Mac or any of the Linux interfaces, with the exception of a few of the window managers or the command line, obviously. But it's built around the concept of how we use computers back in the 80s. When the original Macs came out, you had a floppy disk. I mean, they didn't even come with a hard disk. You had a floppy. There's only so much you can fit on a floppy disk. We also had a really small screen, and usually it had like one window. You had your desktop and a window. That was it. And you had a limited number of files. Well, when you don't have the need for 20 different windows open, when you have just one floppy disk worth of storage to deal with at a time, when it's not connected to a network, when you've got a half dozen to a dozen files, the desktop metaphor works really well. The spatial metaphor works really well. Well, that was 1984. Things have changed a little bit. These days, Microsoft recently released a report or a study they did on how people use computers today. And they discovered the average person, the average user, not people like you and me who probably use a lot more than this, but the average person has 8 windows going at a time. They spend 20 seconds per task before they switch to the mental context to another task. People are using their desktops in a very dynamic way. So there's a lot of applications that we have. It's not just one window anymore. We've got a whole bunch of them. But it's more complex than that. We've got rich... Whoa, That's a clicker too. Okay. We've got rich media types, from graphics to movies and film, audio, obviously. So we're not dealing with simple data types anymore. We're dealing with very complex data that actually is very rich in content. And the whole idea of metadata with MP3 music was really powered a whole new concept in application development when it came to things like iTunes and in KDE Amarok and whatnot. And this is driven by rich media. We also have insane amounts of storage. I mean, you can't even get hard drives these days out of your general computer store that's less than 80 gigs where I live right now. I don't know what the minimum is here. But you try and find a 40 gig drive. You can't go and buy one off the shelf anymore. That's a lot of storage. That's a lot of files. What's funny is the mother of one of my friends, she's not a computer expert or whatever, but she has a terabyte of disk space. And yeah, everyone laughs. It's like, oh my God, I mean, that. It's like 80-something%, because she's a digital camera. She got a really nice digital camera for her birthday a year or two ago, and she just, everywhere she goes, it's like a constant. I think you just make a movie of her life. You just like page through them fast enough. But she has a terabyte of storage. I mean, that's freaking unheard of, right? Today, that's not unheard of. It's fairly common. She's got 4 disks, so 250 gigs each, and she's actually asking for more. And these are literally the grandmas of the world. We also have the concepts of identity, which is becoming more and more central to the usage of the desktop. We're starting to see identity emerge around instant messaging, primarily these days. And the network sits in the middle of it all, right? We have our digital media, whether it comes off a camera, or our handheld devices, and we all expect these things to work together, both in a local network, our USB, our USB buses and whatnot, but also globally. We expect to be able to share files and get data, whether that server is on the other side of the world, or down the hall in the office, or sitting in another machine under your desk. Now, if you compare this to that, it's a very big difference. And yet, our desktops have not changed. When I've described what we're looking to do with the desktop in KDE 4, when I first started explaining it to people would follow me along with what I was saying, but then kind of go, well, why do we need this? And it wasn't until I actually just sat down and said, well, this is what a desktop is actually like today. A lot of people don't sit back and think about it, because this has happened incrementally. Right? This didn't happen between the years 1998 and 1999 or something like that. It happened gradually. And we're now at this situation, and our desktops do not allow people to manage the modern desktop computing experience. So in KDE 4, to get back to topic, one of the things we did is we said we're going to create a workspace, and we're actually going to, in KDE Base, right now in our KDE Base package, we've got this whole bunch of applications, from screensavers to file management to the panels and desktop. K controls in there as well. But it's not really defined which of those applications are meant to be used as a desktop, an integrated desktop, and which are just good applications to have. So, like, your text editor's in there. So we decided to explicitly define what the workspace is. And this is made up of a set of applications. Just point it out of the way. One of them being Conqueror, the file manager / web browser / shell for the GUI, if you will, in KDE 3 right now. It's really powerful, and people who spend time using it come to love it because it's flexible, because it's all in one, because you don't have to have 18 applications that do 18 separate things and know which one to launch at which times and get them all to work together, and Conqueror takes care of this for you, primarily because you have a really nice component system called Kparts in KDE. The downside to it is that people find the interface a bit baroque, a bit complex. So with KDE 4, Conqueror will be there, but we're going to be actually looking at creating a better separation between when someone's doing file management and doing web browsing, so that the interface actually reflects those tasks better. You'll still be able to do everything from both, most likely anyways. But we want to provide a clear interface. That means the toolbars, the menu bars, the sidebar, etc. We tried working on this during the KDE 3 lifecycle, but we ran into some general issues with the design of Conqueror and in some ways K-parts as well in KDE 3. The workspace also includes the window manager and taking advantage of various x.org features. We're looking forward to taking better advantage of things like composite, which allows us to be able to do. How many people have seen the Avalon videos that have been coming out of Microsoft? A couple people. They showed one thing there, like you'd be able to hover over a close button in the title bar in a window, and it like highlights a glow outside of the window. Or when you, in macOS 10, when you've got translucency between windows. Composite gives us the ability to do these things. In fact, I actually saw extra button hovering or glow effects on X before I saw that video, so I don't know who inspired who there, but in KDE 4, we're looking to take advantage of that. If you can get window translucency in KDE 3 using composite, but it kind of sucks. Partly because of the drivers. For instance, right now, with the NVIDIA drivers, if you turn on both composite and OpenGL, you can basically set it's a stopwatch, like how many seconds before it crashes. It really doesn't work very well. You open up an OpenGL app and do some composite effect, and you'll bring down your apps pretty quick. So we're working, and that's one of the nice things about Trolltech as well. They're actually investing quite a few resources into improving that layer. We're not just concentrating on the KDE layer and with Trolltech the Qt layer, but also looking at ensuring that the graphic systems, subsystems on Unix and Linux actually can keep up with our demands. We want to do things that are innovative. We want to push the envelope, but we need to kind of pull the rest of the open source world with us in some places. And so we're investing in that. It also includes the control center and various workspace utilities that one would expect to be there. When KDE was first started by Matthias Ettrich, who's of course the lead developer with Trolltech, he wanted to build a desktop that had all the basic functionality the user needed. And that's still kind of what our focus is. But we're also looking at the desktop and the panels. And I'm ripping them right out. Their current implementation, I've been working on the kicker, the panel, as the maintainer for a couple of releases now, and my eyes bleed and I get very depressed every time I work on it. There's a lot of design issues that we've run into with it, and it doesn't allow us to support the way people use their desktops today. So Plasma is a project all about addressing that part of the workspace. The window manager, the control center, workspace utilities, Plasma, the workspace area will have X11 dependencies. I mentioned earlier that our libraries are going to be portable. Plasma will be taking advantage of features that are found only in X11. Just as kind of a side note. So Plasma, rethinking the desktop, that's what it's all about. I want to make the desktop useful for people again. Like I turn icons off on my desktop because I have like no use for them. How many people here use the icons on their desktop every day? Yeah. And that's like the central metaphor of our desktop. And look how many people use them. A few. Probably 10%. That's really sad. But it shows that it hasn't kept up. I want, when KDE 4 comes out and everyone starts using it, because everyone will, and I ask that question, how many people use the stuff on their desktop? I want 90% of people to raise their hands. Because then the desktop is actually aiding and abetting people's use of their computers. Right now it's not. There's an emphasis on what I call organics. In the real world, there's this thing we have called physics. And physics determines how things work. When I drop something, it falls. When you pull something, when I pull a sheet of paper out of a book, it doesn't magically appear here then here, right? We don't see quantum effects generally at the macro scale. Things move from place to place. When you drop something, it rarely comes to an instant stop. It often goes a bit beyond, or it bounces, or whatnot. These are things that our mind, as we evolved as a human species, has been subjected to for millennia. Our mind is wired to expect organic movement and organic shapes. Our computers, largely because of constraints when it comes to computing power, both in the CPU as well as in the GPU, we have like completely defied and just thrown out organics. We have nice squares everywhere and bevels and things appear when you click on. State of the art on the desktop has been slowly moving away from that, so that when you open something on a tree, it actually expands out. So when designing the Plasma experience, there's an emphasis on making sure that things just don't appear, that things actually emanate from their sources, and that we don't have hard edges everywhere. The idea is that when someone first opens up KDE, we want them to go, ooh, that looks really nice. And then when they use it, they continue to feel that nice glow. Looking at people that have been evaluating KDE versus one of the other desktops, the closed source desktops such as Mac or Windows, we tend to do, compared to Mac, we've traditionally done very poorly on initial impact. When the desktop first loads, they go, well, that looks boring, right? Then they use it for a while and they go, wow, this is really good. And I wish it looked better when I first started up. So that's one of the things that we're looking to change. But we also want to make it something that as you use it, 6 months down the road, you don't feel overburdened with the interface. You don't feel like you need to turn off all this stuff. So it's a combination of calmness and lickability, the gorgeousness of the interface. One of the other basic concepts of Plasma is the idea of universal widgets. Users don't see the difference between an icon on their panel and an icon on their desktop and something in an application. It's just all pictures, right? And they click on them and things happen. And it's really confusing for people why you can't just grab the weather applet and throw it onto your desktop, or why you can't have your instant message buddy list on your desktop or on your panel. Or, I mean, for users, it's like, why are there all these, it's a very hard phrase, artificial boundaries? Well, we know as developers, like, well, yeah, I mean, these are separate applications, and there's implementation issues, and we've been forcing these implementation details upon our users for a couple of decades now, and I'd really like to stop doing that. So the idea of universal widgets, such that we've got a few different form factors: application, on the desktop, floating, and within what we traditionally call a panel. You should be able to use the same widget or the same functionality, the same concept, on any one of those scenarios without it being a separate set of code. You should be able to drag things from your panel to your desktop, make them float, throw them in an application, take them out of an application. This is very possible. We're already close. We've already done this with applications in KDE using K-parts. We need something a little bit lighter for Plasma. And we've kind of come pretty close to that with things like Super Caramba on KDE, or Mac has been trying to do that with their dashboard, and what is the one on Windows? Escape me. I'm really bad with names. Confabulator? Yeah, is that? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm a Windows user, and
yeah.
I don't know what you mean with panels. Can you explain?
Panels? I'm not there yet. That's my next point. I will cover that, though. So the idea being that we've got really nice widgets that render nicely and provide a lot more information than you would see in a small space. For instance, we have liquid weather on KDE, which shows you your 3-day forecast and a bunch of information about your weather. Because of course, as geeks, it's too hard to look outside the window. We have to look at our computer to see the weather. So we've got this really nice, we also have one in KDE. It's a separate set of code, works completely differently, that sits on the panel. There's no cooperation between the two, and you can't drag one from one place to the other and expect them to work, which is silly. To users, it's like mind-boggling why this doesn't all work together. And because we have all these different layers and levels and these implementation details, everyone's reinventing the wheel constantly, and we all have to make it all work together. And this has created a lot of inefficiencies. For instance, Super Caramba offers alpha blending, theoretically kind of, to the desktop in their widgets, and it's really slow. And the primary reason is because it's some little separate application that's a Python hack. And we need to bring all these technologies together. Panels. In Windows, we call it the taskbar at the bottom. It's got your start menu on it. It's got your taskbar buttons, your other little launchers, the clock, and the sys tray.
And custom panels.
Which?
And custom panels.
Yeah, and custom panels, yes. We find people use customize their panel a lot more on Linux, generally because we tend to have a lot more power users on Linux these days. The challenge with panels is that they're pretty foreign. They're, again, one of those things of interface follows implementation, where we often find when people design interfaces as developers, what we do is we take the literal translation of how it's implemented in the code and expose that in our graphical interface. And this is very confusing for people who aren't developers because they don't think like us. And they don't see the technology in the same way. The panels, these little boxes everywhere that people have to like configure and manage, is a pretty foreign concept for people. So I decided to kind of get rid of them completely. And instead, what you have is you have chains of widgets. You just put them together and they click, kind of like magnets. And you can separate them and move them together. There is no separate complex configuration for managing your panels anymore. It becomes, to the user, an implementation detail. We're also looking at, again, I talked about the organic nature of things. One of the interface elements we're introducing with Plasma is the concept of extenders, where you can have a widget that's sitting on a panel. Wish I had a laser pointer. That you have a widget sitting on a panel, and you have something that comes out. Right now, things just appear, and there's no easy way for the developer to actually say, well, these 2 or 3 events need to appear in the same box and widget. And no one really puts the time into making it, so you can do things like separate notifications or have lists in here we've got 2 different notifications associated with the clock that are time-based. Some of the design goals with the extenders is stackability, tearability, and some nice graphical effects as well. And there's a number of applications that are just begging for this kind of application, or this kind of functionality. One of them is hot plug actions when you plug in a digital camera. Right now we pop up a dialog box right in the middle of your screen saying, what do you want to do with this? Just like Windows does. And that sucks. Because most of the time people want to deal with it right away, but not always. The #1 requested feature with that hot plug box or window is get rid of it. They say, it's really cool, but can you put it somewhere where it doesn't interfere with me? And we can't use, well, we've got these windows that are transient. They don't take focus. They pop up and then they go away after a while. We've already got that in KDE 3, but those aren't appropriate either because it requires user interaction. When someone's reaching around their computer to plug in their digital camera, they actually may need more time to get around the front of their computer and actually interact with the interface. So we need something that's almost a quasi mode between those 2 things. Something that stays there until the user interacts with it but doesn't take focus. Other applications are messaging, notification, for instant messaging. We think we can do a lot better than the state of the art right now. And of course, events. And again, with the concept of universal widgets, this will be available in all the form factors. So whether it's on the desktop, whether it's in a panel, whether it's floating, to the person who's actually writing a widget, we're actually going to be able to, this becomes an implementation detail for the developer. They just say, show this message, stack these messages together, show this custom set of widgets. Again, Qt 4 makes this stuff a lot easier, especially when it comes to presentation. Again, we go back to the improved graphical effects that we have in Qt 4. But we're also going to be using for the actual shaping and the actual elements you're going to be interacting with, SVG and JavaScript. Most of the applets, our goal is to have them written in JavaScript. The reason for that is everyone knows JavaScript. It's fairly simple. It's lightweight. We have the ability to export symbols at runtime into a JavaScript interpreter space, and it's also platform independent. So we can ship these things from computer to computer. And I don't care what version of Linux or Unix or whatever other operating system you're running underneath it. And we can also offer single-click installation of these things. With the SVG capabilities that come in Qt 4.1 and beyond, we actually have the ability to provide all of the graphics in SVG format, including advanced features like, for us anyways on X, alpha blending in widgets, and define the entire interface using scalable vector graphics. Has anybody looked at the SVG support in Qt 4.1, the snapshots? It's wicked. I think it was covered in, I think Matthias covered it this morning in his, yeah, talked about it a bit. Actually, the guy who's responsible for the current incarnation of it, sitting at the back of the room there, Zach, he's smiling. There he is. So we're going to be, resting pretty heavily on that. So again, we're not going to be forced to code all the graphics in C++, which means we allow artists to get involved. And that's partly how we're going to achieve the organic and lookable look and feel for Plasma is by allowing actual artists to do it as opposed to me, a developer. If you give me something to aim for, I can hit it, but you don't want to see me doing graphics. But beyond the actual making Plasma look nice and introducing new widgets and whatnot, primarily I want it to be a workflow enabler. And what I keep referring to, me and Plasma, there's actually about a dozen of us that are working on various aspects of it, which is pretty exciting. With Kicker, the panels, it was uninspiring and difficult code, and so it's pretty much been on my shoulders for the last good while. And every once in a while, someone will come along, do a bunch of work, and then eventually find something more exciting and interesting and less headache-inducing to work with. Well, Plasma has been interesting enough that we actually have quite a group of people that are now working on it. Anyways, I want people to be able to use Plasma, and actually, if I'm going to put all this effort into it, we want it so that people actually use it. And for people to actually use it, it has to make their life better in some way, shape, or form. Again, when we talked about how people use what they actually do with their computers today, we want the desktop to reflect this. And as such, enable workflow. One of the things that we'll be providing is allowing you to bring the desktop layer forward and back. Has everyone seen Dashboard on Mac OS X? Yeah, where you press a key combination and this layer appears. I think there's limitations to that approach, in the sense that you can only see it if you press a key combination, it goes away and you have your desktop back. So as opposed to having a separate layer just specifically for that, we're actually going to use a desktop layer and allow you to bring that forward, and again, using composite, we'll be able to make that translucent. But you'll be able to bring that forward and recede. So you can actually say, give me my workflow interface and bring it forward, but if you don't have any windows showing, it's always right there. We're going to be supporting workflow by allowing you to follow the context of what you're doing. How many people work on like one project for an entire month and don't do anything except for that on their computer? One person. You're a very focused and determined individual. Most people, like myself, we do a whole bunch of things on our computers. I might be doing a family photo album. I might be coding. I might be writing an article. Oh, 5 minutes. Okay, you weren't. I thought you were raising your hand. Okay, so like nobody does. Good. So in that context, the question is like, why do we only have the ability to have one desktop when we actually use our computer for different sets of things? It'd be kind of like always taking your car dashboard with you everywhere you went, no matter whether you're driving your car or washing the dishes. That doesn't make any sense. So we're going to allow people to have different desktop layouts and let that follow what you're actually working on. Something else, we talked about the network being at the center of the desktop, and we already do a desktop experience, whether that's instant messaging or groupware or email or the web. And we already do a fairly good job of this with our applications in KDE. The desktop is pretty much completely unaware that there's a network out there, and this is true across all the desktops. I want to be able to provide you the ability to say, this little corner of my desktop, I want to share this with everyone in my work group on my local network. With no configuration, just draw a little box. And anything you throw in there becomes available to everyone else in your work group on your network. Technically, this is very trivial to do. Why no one's done it? I think it's because no one's really looking at the desktop. I don't think anybody really cares about the desktop. I think everyone thinks the desktop is a boring place. It's a boring place because no one's paying attention to it. I want to make it exciting again. I want to make it something that you use. There's no reason why people should have to set up, Samba shares just to share 3 or 4 files. There's no reason why you should have to set up a, KPF on your K personal file server on your panel and then go to, set up a port and all this, multi-step. You should be able to just draw, throw icons in a box, and then have other people be able to, click on their desktop and say, I want to share with, with Aaron. And you should be able to see the content I throw in there. And as I said, technically, we've got all the tools. We just need to expose this functionality. And the goal with the networked widgets is to allow this kind of capability to be simple to add to any applet, not just file icons. We also want to, work on, as I said, the prettiness of it, the purdies. So desktop and docked applets will be blended, organic shapes, subtle animations, and again, Qt 4 allows us to do this. This would just, I've done some basic animation stuff in Kicker, in KDE 3 and 4, or KDE 3, with the help of others as well. But it's pretty primitive, and it could be a lot better. And Arthur and SVG in Qt 4 especially in the 4.1 and 4.2 that are coming, are really helping make this possible. Also, the improved threading in Qt 4 is going to help us a lot. 2 minutes. In the sense that we can now do signals and slots across threads. Qt 4 is a lot more oriented towards people who do threaded development. This is going to enable us to actually use threading on the desktop so that the interface never blocks when it's actually doing compute-intensive things. We're hoping to actually load the JavaScript interpreter, or the runtime, not the parser, but the interpreter, the runtime, in its own thread as well. So really quickly, I've only got 2 minutes apparently. Other technical goals in KDE 4, we are looking at improving our other applications, our application suite, whether that's Kdevelop or Contact or Conqueror. We're looking at providing a better MDI library. We've got a couple of implementations that we're discussing which one to use. A more intuitive toolbar configuration, an improved control center. We're also looking at the speed of KDE and the beauty of it in general. We've got a project called Oxygen with several artists that are working on it, and their whole goal is to make the icons and the widgets actually look really, really nice. There's my last slide in 2 minutes. That is my presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I'm also around for the rest of the day, so feel free to hunt me down. Feel free to email me. And as you can see on the slide, I am sponsored by Trolltech. They enable me to actually spend my day doing nothing but working on KDE and helping promote it, which is really cool. I'd say thank you to Trolltech for making that happen.